My name is Rebecca Kessler, and I am a consultant and trainer with Step Up Consulting. And today we are going to review some of the key learnings that I had from this year's Transition Training Institute. And just so I don't have to say Transition Training Institute over and over, I'm going to call it TTI. This year it was in June, late June, located in Columbia, but it happens yearly. So again, I am Rebecca Kessler. I'm a consultant and trainer. I'm also our lead special education consultant. In my previous life in education, I was an assistive technology director, coordinator. I worked to make sure that students had access to their education through assistive technology tools. And then I worked with special education in a real world learning environment. And before that, I taught just about every grade. So I was really excited to learn more about transition and what that looks like in the updates from DESE, because that's currently the focus of my doctoral work at Mizzou. So first, it is hosted by DESE yearly. Next year, it will be called the Post-Secondary Transition Training Institute. It's over 3 days, but the keynote is on day one. It's about half a day, and then you have a full day in the middle and then another half day at the end. But it is really well attended, and there are lots of agencies and interdepartmental support people that come as well. So first, if you want to scan this QR code here, this is a Padlet put together by Marcia Camp of DESE's resources. So there's all of the resources from the entire conference. So you've got agency resources and parent resources, transition planning documents, action planning documents. Any of those updates are located on this Padlet. Previously, I think that they posted them on the DESE website, but this is kind of where they're all getting updated so that we have things in real time. And then just to give you a glimpse, this is all that I could find or remember, but I know that there were more. So these are some of the community resources and agencies that were at TTI. So anything from Missouri Parents Act, which is Impact, they help teach parents. There's Charting the Life course, Bear Power with Missouri State, Job 1 KC. Registered Youth Apprenticeships is through our PDCs. Department of Social Services, Voc Rehab, Color Coded Chef. So there were lots of different services, institutions, agencies, resources, intermediaries that were present at the Transition Training Institute to give you some hands-on information, be able to have really good conversation, and then network with what agencies are nearby different school sites so that you can use those. So something really exciting is that our PDC is starting to put together a collective of resources within each region so that your school sites are able to access what is available, who do I need to talk to, how do I connect them with services for students and families. And so they're working on gathering all of that information, but I'm sure that several of these resources and agencies you'll see on those lists. Keynote address was really interesting, and it was a different presentation than I've ever experienced before at any other conference. So for the keynote, we watched the movie The Ride Ahead, which was co-directed and starred by Samuel Habib. And so he and his father put this movie together, but they have other movies and his dad's worked on other movies before. And so Samuel has quite a few different conditions. So he's got epilepsy, and then a degenerative disorder called GNAO1 disorder. And so it makes it hard for him to have speech or move his body parts. Um, so he has a really rare experience. But the really cool part is that he's showing his experience towards independence, which is what we want all students with disabilities to have. So you get to see Sam attend college, and he goes to a local university, and then now he's actually transferred to a four-year university. You see him working towards apartment life and what that looks like with his caregivers, and then a lot of his medical challenges. So during the movie, he actually sets out to interview all of these other adults with disabilities about what their challenges were, how they overcame them, what it looks like to transition into adulthood. So at the conclusion of the movie, Sam and his dad, Dan, came on Zoom, and they actually had a lot of really good dialogue with the audience. And the best part was that students with disabilities came up and asked their questions. So they were asking Sam about his experiences. And it was just this really beautiful full circle moment when the point of the movie is that Sam is asking questions of people that are ahead of him in life. And then all of these kids that were at the conference were able to ask Sam because Sam was a little bit ahead of them. So it was a really beautiful experience. It is going to be on PBS. I think it's July 21st. And so if you scan this QR code, you'll be able to go to their website and get even more resources. So on this tab right here, they've got a resources tab with downloadables that you can use with students. And then they offer screening services and packages. So some new changes or some updates is the ICAP requirement for all students. So this is in Senate Bill 638. Lots of schools have been doing the ICAP already, but in case you don't know what this is, the ICAP is a required four-year plan for all students leaving the 8th grade. So it has to be conducted before 9th grade. It can replace the course of study in Form C, which we'll talk about in a little bit, in the transition documents in some instances. So you can reference the graduation handbook. Missouri has it on DESE's website. But it ensures that all IEP students also get to meet with a counselor because that's not a required member of their IEP team. So they get to meet and talk through course planning and how to set themselves up for post-secondary success. So the website is here with this QR code, but I wanted to focus a little bit more into that Senate bill because there's a little caveat. So this first part of the Senate bill, I think it's page 45 and 46. Part one is all about the ICAP requirements. So it's requirements for graduation, that it includes career and post-secondary goals, their course work and program of study, grade appropriate and career-related services. So things like apprenticeships, internships, externships, things like that. And then student assessments. So you can collect if someone's taking the ASVAB or the ACT or whatever assessments they have that you can gather that all into one spot. Part two is interesting. So I went and had a really great conversation with one of the compliance officers with RPDCs. And so part two says each school district shall adopt a policy to permit the waiver of the requirements of this section for any student with a disability if recommended by the student's IEP committee. So what that means is your district has to adopt a policy, like a school board policy, that allows the waiver of students with disabilities to engage in the ICAP. And you have to have like substantial reason for why you would do that. And so the conversation that I had was really pertinent and informational because we want to make sure that we're thinking of all of our students with disabilities, that they are Gen Ed first. So the Form C that we'll look at in just a little bit has a course of study requirement, which is the bulk of the ICAP. So instead of duplicating that work, we want those to work in partnership. Now, we might have a waiver that says students don't need to have the ICAP. We're not going to track it that way because we already track on Form C. But what we really want to be doing is we want to use those ICAP requirements and then take those and insert them into the IEP document and just make sure that we're doing all those compliance measures that are required for their IEP. So this part is the part that I heard not a lot of people talking about or not understanding is that every school should adopt this policy and write it into their school board policies to allow the waiver to exist if the IEP team determines that that's what's best for the child. Now on to Form C. So this is kind of what Form C looks like. We have their course of study, we have their transition services, their post-secondary goals, but there's a big change that's coming. So federally, transition planning has had to occur by the time that the student was 16 years old. Missouri uses Form C. It's a Missouri state form, not a federal form. But in Missouri, starting in the 26-27 school year, transition planning will be a requirement that has to be completed by the end of 8th grade. So there's not an age on that. So it might be an 8th grader is 13 or 8th grader is 14. For some reasons, we might have 8th graders who are 16. So what we want is by the time that that student leaves 8th grade, that they have started their transition planning so that they are prepared for their high school processes, which actually puts it directly in line with the ICAP because the ICAP has to be completed and you have to have the four-year course of study by the time a student leaves 8th grade and enters 9th grade. So for this, students must be invited to their IEP meetings to be involved in the transition planning process. So based on research, we know that that's one of the best things that we can do is having students be involved in that self-determination process and be involved in their transition planning. The focus is on employment. So something that was clarified was this first section here for measurable post-secondary goal is that we want students to be working towards a very clear idea of what their employment is going to look like. So it's not based on transitionary employment, like I'm going to work one job while I go to school to get this other job. It's what is the end goal after that post-secondary transition period. So for instance, after high school, I, Sarah Martinez, will be working in a hair salon. So that's what they're working towards. And then your course of study, whether it's on the ICAP or the Form C, should demonstrate courses and services aligned with that employment goal. So we want everything to be working towards a particular end. And so because this change is coming from the age of 16 to the end of 8th grade, middle school teachers are now going to have to help with this process. So that's going to be a lot of new for a lot of people. So Sydney Ream is a special education teacher out of Buffalo High School, and she put together this big collection of resources, if you scan this QR code, that can help with some of that process. So compliance for that section requires that there's a measurable post-secondary goal, that we identify transition services, then we're providing those services. We have our annual goals, and then that means that our 8th grade teachers must introduce those transition concepts into the IEPs. So that might be some inner teaming conversations to have those 8th grade teachers cross-trained with our high school teachers. And then we can do a lot of that by partnering with our school counselors. So rather than having the special education teacher and the counselor do that work separately, if the counselor is doing that with all students, have our students participate in that. And then when we get to our IEP meeting, we might be making changes or providing more information, or just saying, yes, we've already completed that process, and we copy portions of that into their Form C. And so we can use any of those assessments from Mo Connections, pre-ETS services, teacher-created assessments that can help give us some more information about that child, but we can partner all of those together. So especially when counselors are pushing into classrooms to do Missouri Connections, we can use that information if we request that from the counselor and insert that into Form C for transition planning. And then I wanted to highlight, because of the Padlet that was at the beginning with this year's materials, there are previous materials located on DESE's website. So this QR code will take you to this landing page for the 2024 Transition Training Institute. And if you scroll down this landing page, there are slide decks and PDFs and resources from past transition institutes. And then several of the RPDCs also host transition training academies that happen a few times a year. I heard it's 2 to 4, depending on what region you're in. So those are great places to get more information and to build a really robust knowledge set around transition and how we can help students with disabilities be even more successful. And so just to quickly summarize what we went over today, some really positive highlights from TTI was that each RPDC region is collecting information in a centralized location with services, agencies, referrals, ways for us to really gather the information that we need to support students with what is available in our community and what we might need to seek outside of our communities. And then intermediaries, so Voc Rehab, Missouri Mental Health, all of those departments, and then even private entities and private businesses can support with employment paperwork, interviewing, job site training, apprenticeships, financial paperwork, so sign up for Social Security and things like that. And then the LEA is responsible for identifying what support needs are needed for that child and then connecting the students and families to those services. So there are things that we provide in the school site. And so we might do some of that job site training and appropriate conversational techniques and all of that. But then if there's things that we can't provide because it's not what we do, we want to identify the proper intermediary to support that work. And then The Ride Ahead will air on PBS on July 21st. There are PG rated versions of the film available for watch parties. So there's 2 versions that are available. One talks a little bit more about some mature content and what that looks like for individuals with disabilities. And then there's another version that's a little bit more PG that would be appropriate to show in schools. On our ICAP, it is required for all students before 9th grade. That includes all of our students with disabilities. Senate Bill 638 is what requires the ICAP, but it also requires us to have a waiver policy to allow IEP teams to decide that a student does not need an ICAP, but you have to have that waiver policy in place. And then one of the biggest changes is that transition planning will move from the age of 16 to the end of 8th grade, starting in 2026-2027 school year. I hope that this was helpful. If you can send individuals to TTI next year or to those transition training academies, it's a wealth of knowledge and a great place to meet a lot of really helpful intermediaries that can support all of our students. as they transition from high school into life. Okay. With that, thank you and have a good day.